Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pharmaceutical Soccer. I am so happy to be here to talk about your Nashville Soccer Club in all of the best ways that we possibly can. I'm here, of course, with Blair Shabilla and Clay Trainum. As always, it's good to see you folks. Like every week. Like I do like this. Like I actually was really excited that I got to talk to you during the week as
You know,
well. It was for different circumstances, but
Steven moves away and suddenly he just doesn't miss the podcast anymore.
Yeah, he shows up now on time because.
It's his only time
Um,
to see us. So really him
right,
showing up is
right.
all our fault.
okay, look.
Don't give him too much of a good thing because it's like a trait thing. He comes to expect seeing us. So when it's no longer there, now he misses us. I
This
get
is
it.
stupid. For one, we finally got way more consistent with our actual schedule, which is why I'm now able to make it more. So don't want to
And
hear
whose fault was it that we weren't consistent with the schedule? Some are wondering. Some are
Gary
wondering.
Smith,
I'm just
and
gonna
now
say.
he's not here. So like I don't know what to tell you.
Who?
Gary Smith. It was Gary
Oh,
Smith's fault.
sure. Blame that on him too while we're at it. Anyway,
He's already turning
let me
into a walking Facebook group. It's Gary Smith's fault for everything.
the 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 game at Nashville game being in the afternoon, but not only in the afternoon, because we had Sunday afternoon game. Being the Saturday afternoon game was a little wild. I'm not gonna lie. Like we finished up the press conference and it was like 3 o'clock, and it felt like it was 11. But no, you had the whole day still. So I came back home and I played some Xbox. I'm deep into Fallout 4 now. I know I mentioned it
He's
like a couple of weeks
addicted.
ago, I think. I'm like too deep into it. Like I might need to be like pulled out of it. And then also I got to watch a movie with my girlfriend. It was fun. It was nice Saturday night. And I got to watch MLS actually before the movie. So like I think we need more afternoon games. And I think MLS need to stagger that schedule. I know that's been said before, but I really think they can make a good sort of all day type of thing.
I would have loved a 12:30 Saturday game a few weeks ago. I would love a 12:30 Saturday game in a month's time. When I don't love a 12:30 Saturday game is when it's a 13-year brood of cicadas.
That is fair.
Let
I,
me
I
tell
was
you.
covered, thankfully. I didn't have
It
to worry
was
about it.
a nightmare where we were. So I think I killed it probably at least 20 over the course of the game. They were everywhere.
I
Really?
did get
Like in the
multiple texts
stadium they
about
were
it.
there?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There was somebody higher up in our stands who was picking them off people and throwing them at his kid. So it was very funny leaving because I park in lot 10 and there's that big tree up the ramp, up the ramp to get into the stadium. And they were all over the tree. And so every time a little kid walked by, you would just start hearing screaming because they would just like come out of the tree at the people. It was crazy.
That is kind of wild, actually. I'm not gonna lie.
But yeah,
Um,
I would echo the Saturday afternoon thing because it is wild. Like we left, we went to Plaza Mariachi, had a good time, and then went to Nashville Rhythm game. So it was a fully soccer-filled Saturday.
that's
And
good.
as a tradition in this podcast, we never talk about any other soccer other than Major League Soccer and Nashville SC, and we'll keep it that way. Let's keep moving. Steven, what do you have next?
What? I mean, we talk about the rhythm, like not just. Do you mean just
No,
specifically
he's making
soccer
a
in
reference to
Nashville?
Arsenal. He's talking about
Oh, sorry,
Arsenal.
that's what he was
What
talking
what is that?
about.
It's the reason he's wearing an Iraq shirt today.
And not an
He's
Arsenal
moving
fan.
on.
No.
He's moving on.
Anyway,
Anyway,
you're lucky I have a shirt on.
look, this
No,
was
if Arsenal would have won the league, you definitely wouldn't have a shirt on. Let's make that clear.
If Arsenal would have won the league, I wouldn't have showed up to this recording. Let's be clear. I would not be alive today.
that's also fair. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry you got your hopes up.
Can we move on?
Yes.
Okay.
Look, it was the first non-Gary weekend in Nashville SC history, which is it's weird and wild to say. I don't know if you guys got. I did over the week, like when the news happened and over the weekend, of people like legitimately checking in with me via text message, being like, "Hey, How are you feeling right now? Like, is everything good? Like, I had lost like a family member or something for just multitudes of time, being like, look, like I am sad that Gary's gone, but I also understand. Like, it was weird. It was a weird thing to have happen here. Um, it was strange.
I mean, it is really something that the 2019 Steven Robinson wanted on this show. It just took several years to get to that point.
I was Gary out for like 2 seconds. I don't even know what you're talking. I have defended. What is this today?
So I think it does. I think now with some time given to it, and I do believe in by the end of the season or even a couple months from now, I think he will be remembered differently in Nashville SC in a better way. I think as well. This recent run and anything from Leagues Cup on, I think has been it's affected the way he's looked for Nashville SC, I think, and I think it changed a lot of people's mind about whether or not he should still be in charge of Nashville SC. But I firmly believe that in a few years we'll look back at this as a very very good manager who was able to get something out. And by the way, I'm gonna go ahead and plug, if you haven't listened to our sort of instant reaction to the news, go back and listen to that, because that episode, is it's just about Gary Smith and that decision. So you can just go back and listen to it if you haven't already. And I do think it's a little sad, and I think it didn't really. I didn't expect to be as sad, I guess, about it until like I was going into the stadium and obviously the press conference and all that, and it felt like way different vibe, obviously than usual. So I think that part hit me a little harder than I thought. I didn't expect to be like sad about it. I don't know. I just thought like everybody can move on, but it is a little sad. It's just a person who's been around and kind of was in the spotlight for all of those years. He was the person we talked to every week. He was the person there every single week.
Well, and I think the thoughts on him will change quite quickly if Nashville isn't successful at the manager hire, or it takes them a while to do it, which I think is something to keep an eye on. I honestly feel, and I don't think I said this on the show, but I honestly feel like they were worried that they would come into this game and win and then have to make a decision on Gary Smith having won 3 of the last 4 games, which would be a difficult place to put, the decision makers above Gary Smith in if they were looking to really replace him in this window. And if they're not going to replace him particularly quickly, then it will make you think, what was the point of that? And I think that is going to play a role in the way that and how quickly people become wistful of Gary Smith being on the sidelines. We'll talk about the performance more in general. I mean, we'll talk about the performance more specifically in the next segment. But like if Nashville kind of plucks away and draws a bunch of games and maybe wins the occasional one, loses the occasional one, it's not a huge change from what probably would have played out if he was still there. I mean, just based on the what we've been seeing. So I I think it really will. We're going to get a lot of information in the next month or so if they're actually looking at people, if they're going to bring someone in quickly, if it will make sense with who comes in. I think that'll help people turn the page more.
Well, and with that being just kind of the topic of discussion as well, we actually went to our Twitter this morning to kind of talk about that on our poll about what you think the next manager hire will be or what you want the next manager hire to be. So Valer, why don't you kind of go into that Twitter poll and what you put out?
Yeah, in our super original segment that we only do and nobody else has ever done.
Not a single podcast does it.
Never has ever happened in the history of podcasting. Put out a Monday poll for what type of manager would you like to see coaching Nashville SC? Now, obviously, there are a lot of profiles to target with managers. The options I put out there was MLS proven. So in my mind was somebody like Gio Savarese, maybe even a Bruce Arena or any of those.
Have your attention, please. We will.
Sorry about that. And then the
NTSU has an announcement to make.
So that was the first option, is MLS proven. The next option was USL or MLS Next Pro, sort of up and comer guy coming in. And then the last option I had was a European guy. So maybe, big name or bigger name, or maybe somebody we've all heard of, right? Somebody who maybe coaching in Europe has gone a little stale. David Moyes, perhaps some other names as well. Less likely, Ronnie Dyla, who was in MLS and now went to Europe, and now he's fired from Europe in Club Bruges, but won MLS Cup with NYCFC. Anyway, there are a lot of names out there, so I was just curious on like profile wise, not even name wise. And then I asked people to give me the names, and I was a little surprised by this. I'm not gonna lie. About a little bit over 60% of people said they prefer a European name, and then only about 15-16% for the other ones, which is MLS proven or like an up and comer from USL, and a few others for other types of manager. But this is a poll of almost 200 users, and we got about 60% of them saying more of a European feel. So I think it's a little surprising simply because of how this team recruits players. So I don't know. I don't honestly know where they are going. But I think it's interesting that the fans kind of are leaning that way.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting as well because, like, especially if you're looking for an opposite effect of, what Gary Smith was as a manager. I'm sorry, I don't know if going to Europe is that. Like, you're gonna have the ability to get one of those English-style defensive managers that come into play, and especially with Ian Ayres CEO, like that's why Gary Smith was hired in the first place. So if you're looking for this team to have some sort of different like just look on things, is European manager the way you really want to go?
I mean, Gary Smith was hired because he was successful in USL. I mean, he was here before Ian Ayres. And so I think I would stop short of that. I will say this, like, there are levels, So, like, yes, I understand your point, but some of these European managers are better managers. That's the reason they're managing in, say, the Premier League. Like that, there is something to that. So it's a real question of whether you want to go win now or build something. With the makeup of Nashville's roster, I would assume that you would want to go more win now. And if someone like a David Moyes were available, that's someone who you could win with. I don't personally believe that that's going to happen. I've been joking about that on this show for like 2 months or at least a month and a half. I don't see it happening. But if that were happening for me as a fan, knowing that Nashville's best players are in their late 20s, early 30s, that's what I would want, because that's a sign that you're going to use this roster and try and get something out of it, as opposed to blow everything up and start over, which may take a couple of years to get to the other side of.
Yeah, I think for me, like I haven't heard anything, and we nobody has heard anything. This just happened, right? I mean, Mike Jacobs was very adamant about taking their time with this search and figuring out the right option and all that. I haven't heard anything, but I would be pretty surprised if Nashville SC goes outside of MLS experience, or at least US soccer experience, to get this manager. I think based on everything we know, based on everything we've seen, I just find it hard to believe that they'll go and get at somebody who doesn't know the league very well, or at least know the leagues here. So to me, even I don't see a USL sort of manager coming in. I don't think they can afford to take that risk, in all honesty. To me, this seems like if we're saying this team is a win now, MLS veteran sort of team, you go and get an MLS veteran type of coach. That's the way I'm thinking about it. Now, to be fair, Mike Jacobs said he's keeping an open mind. He said the search, they're not limiting it to just these people or this group of people. There are obviously the soccer market is so huge. You can go wherever you want and get your manager. But to me, for my money, I would look at this roster and say somebody needs to get an MLS proven coach for this roster.
I think if Mike Jacobs was the one making the call, that's what he would do. I'm not fully convinced that he's the only one making that call, because I think Mike Jacobs' job is just as much on the line as Gary Smith's was. Gary was the first domino to fall. And if it's not just Mike Jacobs making that call, it wouldn't surprise me if they take a big swing.
Yeah,
I think it's in character for Jacobs to go after someone in MLS. That makes sense. We've seen that, and he's been successful with it, to be fair. So I can see that happening. But if it's coming down to Ian Ayres, John Ingram, and they're going to take a swing, which they may take a swing, the roster numbers came out last week. Nashville's fourth in spending. That's showing a lot of ambition. It wouldn't surprise me if they take a big swing on somebody coming over from Europe And some of those guys have been courted in the past by MLS teams if they've not necessarily taken the job, or they've taken the job and gone back to Europe, things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that direction taken, and I would still view that as a win now direction. It really, to me, it really is up in the air who's the one making the final call on this.
Well, Valer, I would like to. What were the vibes? Because we talked about it on Thursday. What were the vibes of the press conference like from Mike Jacobs and Ian Ayre kind of talking about that? Did it seem more like a win now type of situation, or what were the vibes kind of like in that press conference?
So it wasn't Ian Ayre. We didn't get to talk to Ian Ayre. We only got to talk to Mike Jacobs and Roomba, of course, after the match. But for Mike, I mean, he seemed very adamant, I would say, about this squad. I think he truly believes that this squad is capable of more than what has been provided with Gary Smith. He kind of shied away from any sort of Gary Smith talk, whether it was positive or negative. He was just like, I'm not going to comment on a man who isn't here anymore. That's kind of a direct quote from him, honestly. I get it. I think I personally would have loved to get a little bit more information from Mike, but we've learned over the years that it's a classic Mike Jacobs situation where he says all these words, and there's you have to really try to get something out of him. He's not one opposite of Gary Smith, who will literally, you ask him a question, he'll give you like a 5-minute technical explanation of it. Mike Jacobs will give you 30 seconds of very little.
What we did get more of, though, even though we didn't get a ton out of Mike Jacobs, we did get more Patreon members, which is fantastic to hear, which is great. I don't know what Gary Smith was holding us back when it came to new Patreon members, apparently. So it's good to see we got two new Patreon members. Shout outs to Josh and Dale. Thank you so much for joining the Patreon. We really appreciate it. You could be like Josh and Dale.
Yeah, real quickly, Josh, if you are the same Josh that came up to me at the stadium, thank you. Shout out to you. If you're a different Josh who came up to me at the stadium, shout out to that Josh. I don't know. I don't know the last name. So shout out to Josh and Dale. As Steven said, we appreciate you so much. It's $5 a month. You should sign up as well. We have a pretty good squad of Patreons now. So make sure to join that squad up, and I am thinking about, there's going to be a lot of movements here and a lot more discussions. So you'll hear a little bit more about the Patreon later. So make sure to join in. $5 a month. That's all it takes.
Are we going to make a best 11 of our Patreon members and see where they go?
I don't. Everybody gets in. We have a huge bench.
Well, thank you again so much, Josh and Dale. Appreciate it. We're going to talk more about the match on Saturday without Gary Smith. And as you know, we got a lot to talk about when it comes to international call-ups and end of the season stuff for European League, all that type of stuff. We'll do that next right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer. And we are back right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer at Pharma Soccer on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And like we talked about in the first segment, you can be like Josh and Dale, who just joined our Patreon, keeps the lights on for our Patreon. We really appreciate it. It gives us the ability to keep doing the show every single week. It keeps me here, as Clay and Blair joked about, that I am here specific. I'm just going to shut up. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. But look, Nashville SC did have a match against Atlanta, a 1-1 draw. Do we even want to talk about the Charlotte match? We didn't really necessarily. I don't know. It was boring. I guess it was terrible.
It wasn't good. Yep.
Cool. All right. That was great. It wasn't even Charlotte. Who did we play on Wednesday? Did we play Charlotte on Wednesday?
Yes, it was Charlotte away. No, it was not. It was Toronto.
That's who it was. Yeah. Okay. That's right.
We did talk about the Charlotte match.
Yeah, we did talk about it. We didn't talk about the Toronto.
Wow, Steven, way to do your prep.
I did zero prep. I will say that. Not going to lie. I did zero prep for this episode. But I know Valer and Clay definitely have me covered. Clay, when you have the ability to...
No, Clay does not have you covered right now. Clay is gone for a minute. I got you, though. What's up?
Thank you, Valer. I appreciate you having me. Look, I mean, it was interim coach coming in. Nobody kind of knew what to expect. Valer, on your end, what did it seem like kind of in this? I mean, this is a whole new situation that we've never been a part of with the team in this kind of, I'm not necessarily going to say in shambles, but I have to assume with the manager being fired, it's going to be a little bit different around there on match days, at least for now.
I think for the first time in a while, fans went into Geodis Park not knowing what to expect. I think it's been pretty much the same or some sort of similar story for a while for this team going into Geodis Park. So for first time when I parked, I went to the supporters tailgate, kind of talked to some people, take some pictures and whatnot, and the vibes were very much like a little bit of excitement, but also not too much excitement. It was just pretty much trying to understand what what are we gonna see? What are we gonna see today? And for me personally, based on the way Atlanta came into this match, pretty depleted and in a bad form, I thought Nashville SC has a really good opportunity to kind of get the 3 points and honestly get even get somebody like Rumba Montali like some time to get that new manager bump and all that stuff, and to see the players kind of play for something else and play in a different way. Maybe I don't think the play was a whole lot of it wasn't a lot of difference in the play in itself, but I think there were some differences that made you believe that this is not a Gary Smith coach team anymore, and I think some of those differences were not as obvious on the pitch, but definitely we were able to notice them.
Yeah, I was kind of excited. Like it was like a weird kind of excitement. And for me, for a couple of reasons. One, um, Atlanta's social media team with their stupid cameo beforehand was just garbage. So I kind of wanted Nashville to be the reason why Pineda did get fired, which I have to assume he saved himself another week or so with getting at least a draw against Nashville. But I think I knew kind of coming in that there weren't going to be a ton of differences in the way the team was going to kind of build itself and kind of because it can't. I mean, the interim coach is still going to have some sort of understanding just based on, and is going to want to be able to put the best squad out there in some sort of structure. And he did end up making a change, going away from Gary's kind of three back formation into a four back, which was something that we did not expect at all. I didn't expect, but I do think the four back probably. I don't know. He probably put the strongest lineup you could possibly have out there, Valer.
Yeah, I think it suits Nashville better. I think that the players are with the players that Nashville has assembled. I think the four at the back makes a lot more sense for them, and it was more so than the four at the back or anything. I think the midfield was a little interesting. We got to see Hani Mukhtar play almost in a similar line as Sean Davis. I think at the end of the day, it looked more like 4-1-4-1 ish here and there. The numbers don't really matter in the formation. It's more about where the players line up. But you could see it. It was almost like Sean Davis and Mukhtar were the dual eights, with Mukhtar playing a little higher and Sean Davis being a little backwards. And then Godoy was firmly behind both of them. I think the other thing that was interesting is that going to both the wingers with Tyler Boyd and Jacob Schaffelberg, and I think this is the first match that Alex Muyl didn't start. Now, obviously, with Shaq Moore being back, that makes sense. But we still didn't see a Nashville SC lineup that was fully healthy from all ends. We still didn't get to see a 90-minute Walkers and a 90-minute 90-minute Shaq Moore and a 90-minute why can't I think of their names now?
Whose name?
Clay,
I'm trying to think
you all
of.
right?
I'm back.
Okay, Clay's back. Sorry. From the injury standpoint, we also didn't get to see Drew Yearwood being in the squad at all. So you're looking at a Nashville team that was still recovering from injuries, and not to mention the third game in the span of a week, which is a lot for these players, especially those who have been hurt and are coming back. So between all that, we still haven't seen like a strong lineup from Nashville SC. But in terms of on paper and what is available, Tyler Boyd, that's the player I couldn't think of for some reason. But in terms of lineup and from who is available, that was the strongest you can start the first 45 minutes with.
Well, for me, it was the lineup that let Nashville get the best players on the field at the same time, which has been a struggle, I think, throughout the season. And that was the thing. That was the biggest takeaway for me, is that we're finally getting a chance to see um, more good players closer together. But my real big takeaway, and this is the thing that I talked about on here a few weeks ago, is like when you're not playing well, like the things that you can do, even if you're not playing well, that will get the fans behind you, that will get people excited, are to push, to press, to show energy, to be high energy, things like that. And that is what this lineup delivered on, especially in the first half. Now, they were a little bit gassed towards the end of the half and certainly towards the end of the game, but it wasn't necessarily pretty, but it was active. And unfortunately, in the last several years of me watching Everton, that changes games. If the team comes out and it's active and it's forcing things and it's forcing the issue, even if it doesn't work, it at least gets people into the game and maybe can pull the crowd onto you, especially in a game like the Atlanta match where there's a lot of Atlanta fans in the building. I find that to be pretty important. I mean, in a very big way, that's what was lacking against Charlotte, and that was what was lacking against Toronto. And they were able to get a result against Toronto, but like that's the thing that was that when you talk to people after the game, they're like they didn't look like they cared. That's the way a lot of people feel. And I don't think you could watch the Atlanta match and come away feeling the same way.
Yeah, and I think one of those
that was the big difference for me watching the game.
Yeah, and I think one of those players that definitely showed a lot of energy was Hani Mukhtar, and I think that was something that this team definitely needed. Especially in that first half, and then of course him pulling the classic Hani Mukhtar. Was it actually a foul type of scenario? Obviously, I think if he would have just kept running, like it still would have been a foul anyways, but he decided to do it in a Hani Mukhtar way. But then good for him to, see and bury that penalty to go up in the first half.
I mean, it reminded me, it's very funny, like thinking about the game. It sort of reminded me the way it played out of the San Jose game, where Nashville scores one goal and it's a penalty, but it wasn't undeserved. like they had very much did enough to earn one goal. I mean, Hani also hits the post with a great shot from distance. He was pushing things out. He was pushing forward. I mean, a lot like the Hani we expect. And when he did draw the penalty, like I'll be honest with you, I didn't get a good angle on it, so I don't fully. I can't speak to it the same way that maybe someone else could, but like for me, I was like, oh, that's a penalty, clear as day, definitely a penalty. And then I heard it was a little bit more dicey after the fact,
So
but it
when I
looked a
first
penalty.
saw it, I wasn't sure, honestly. And the more I think about it, I think the more it is a penalty. It's not about the contact that Guzan makes with him, it's the fact that he makes him jump. So
Mhm.
if Guzan wasn't there or made that tackle in a different way, he wouldn't have forced Hani Mukhtar to jump, which, like Steven said, he can continue his run, score the goal. Because Guzan comes at him in that way, Hani wants to save his legs, so he jumps. And that in itself is penalty worthy in the rules. Now, I get it. It's a little software. I mean, I think Atlanta fans were upset about it, and I honestly understand, but those are the rules. And I've seen that same penalty given so much in MLS and outside of MLS. So I don't know. I don't know if the rule needs to change for them, but that's besides the point at this point. But I will say Hani Mukhtar looked like his MVP self for the first time in a minute, and I think when I criticized him, I think, a little bit after the Toronto match and after the Charlotte match, specifically after Toronto, because even though Nashville won 2-0, Hani Mukhtar just did not look like himself. He did not look like the player that we had seen. And obviously, when you hear all the comments about the coach, your your first instinct is like, well, who else is responsible for this? And to me, he's a big piece of this as well. Because if you don't have Hani playing as an MVP level, you're wasting $5+ million a year on a player who was an MVP at one point but isn't anymore.
And I think it was also a situation in like that shows Nashville, like that game in general shows Nashville's problem offensively is that Hani had a great game. Like you can't take that away from him. But everyone around him was just a little bit off. And the biggest example of that is the Schaffelberg missed pass, where he does all the hard stuff perfect. Guy comes in, he gets out of it, gets around the corner. He's got two guys he can pick out. One of them's Hani. I can't remember who the other one was. Maybe in Surge, but either way, you just got to pick one, and it's a tap in. And it's not like the easiest ball, but it's a pretty simple ball for a winger to play. And he misses both of them. Oh, it's Boyd. He misses both of them. Boyd has to come around, collect it. They did end up with another half chance out of it, but that would have made it 2-0. And as far as I'm concerned, the way Atlanta was playing at times in that game, obviously a team that's kind of counting down to when their manager gets fired as well. I think that probably puts it away and Nashville wins the game. I don't think that they're coming back from 2-0 down the way that they were. And so that was another example of like, if Nashville does a couple more things right, makes the right play, or can make a simple play, they come away with a win. And how many times have we said that this season?
Well, yeah, and I think stuff like that shows that I think a manager is going to be able to help in some way, shape, or form the way organization happens to get to that point of getting back on track. But the players also have a job to do themselves when it comes to being able to kind of figuring it out themselves, because they have to work together no matter what the manager's plans may be. And I think some of that was a little bit evident, like offensively as well. But I also think defensively, in some point, there was a little bit of just kind of, discourse or misorganization.
I think that's kind of there's no like, I don't want to be like, oh, I told you so or anything like that. But for the folks out there who were like, Gary Smith is making Jacob Schaffelberg play wingback, and that's why Jacob Schaffelberg isn't good. Like, I really disagree with that. Like, I cannot disagree with that anymore. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, the manager, the coaching staff is responsible to get these players to the best shape and best way possible, but also these players, like Steven said, have to perform. Gary Smith and his coaching staff also made Jacob Schaffelberg a Canadian international, where previously he was a French player in Toronto. So Jacob Schaffelberg is happy playing whatever he needs to do for this team, because this coaching staff and this team had put him on the platform that he is right now. So I think there's a little bit of like a back and forth here. And in the same vein, Gary Smith probably should have helped out with should have done better or came up with new ideas offensively, right? We've always talked about that. But also these players should have executed those ideas better when they were on the pitch. And it's a little of both. And that's what bothers me, because it just seems like the players get away with it without being accountable until they do it for like they're bad or in bad form for consistent like 2 years or so. And then when fans decide to turn on a player, it's like, they turn on within an instant, and all of a sudden, oh no, he's bad. Or like somebody like Jacob Schaffelberg, which is like, oh yeah, he's good, but then Tilbury is bad, and that's that. Like, it's way more gray than that. And I think the players have a responsibility to put themselves in the best position possible. At the same time, that doesn't take accountability away from the coaching staff. But if this game taught us anything, is that no, Gary Smith single-handedly isn't making Jacob Schaffelberg or Sam Surridge not score. You know what I mean? That's the thing that people just see. They seem to be convinced about, and it's just that's not how soccer works. Like that's not how it is. And then in defensive is the same thing, because defensively, I thought Nashville SC looked better. To be honest with you, I thought they were better than they were against Toronto. Even though they didn't concede against Toronto, there were some more shaky moments against Toronto. Toronto just couldn't capitalize. And same thing with, if you go back to Charlotte, they looked good defensively, but that one mistake. Here is the same mistake. It kind of comes from the midfield rather than the defense. Godoy doesn't pressure, and then Mukhtar kind of goes higher up, leaves the player alone. Player has all the time in the world to get a shot in. I think it's Schlees. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He gets a beautiful shot. Now, he deserves all the credit to that. However, other than that moment, Nashville SC were pretty compact and organized defensively. And I think that goes back to the players themselves. I don't think this was, because one thing Roomba said after the match is that this is a team that has always been organized defensively, and he wanted to get back to that to start with. And that's a good place to start with, because I think this shows potential that he can maybe get this team organized at the back, which would allow Hani Mukhtar and Jacob Schaffelberg and Sam Surridge to go on the attack and make something happen.
I will say I for the most part agree on that. But Saba from Atlanta was giving Nashville fits at times throughout that game, which you would expect. The other teams have good players too. But the thing that people brought this up to me is, and I don't think that this is a thing. I think these are professionals in a game. Is that Mayer and Zimmerman didn't seem to be on the same page for huge chunks of the game, and Zimmerman was kind of like trying to get into him. And I had multiple people ask me about that at halftime and then again after the game, and I just felt like it should be brought up. If multiple people are asking me about it, then other people saw it. And I think that it's probably just professionals getting used to playing in a system that they haven't played in the last several weeks because they've been mostly playing in a back five and kind of getting back to the way things were when they played in a back four. And so if you take that on top of Saba having a pretty influential game, even if he didn't really get on the score sheet, it makes sense.
Also, like, these players are demanding of themselves, of each other, of the coaching staff. I mean, how many times did we see Mukhtar?
A lot of times, Valer. I think we saw Mukhtar
we see Mukhtar
a lot
all
of
the time.
times. Ton of times that we saw Mukhtar.
This is a technical difficulty pharmaceutical soccer podcast.
Yeah, we've had a couple of fire alarm and Valer's internet, man. It's been wild. It's been a good time.
Yeah.
Valer, how's it going, buddy?
Am I back?
Yes.
Oh, why were you
We've
so
seen
surprised about
so
Mukhtar?
often.
Why were you so surprised about Mukhtar going to talk to Gary Smith?
Well, because we didn't hear what your point was because your internet cut out.
Oh,
So
my bad.
We
I was
heard
like, why are
just
they
how many
freaking
times
out?
have we seen Mukhtar? And we're like, we see him so much.
We do see Mukhtar a lot.
Okay. Let me say it again. How many times have we seen Mukhtar going to talk to Gary Smith about tactics? How many times have we seen shouting? And that's normal. That's what soccer is. This is what they do for a living, guys. Like, of course they're gonna be yelling at each other because it matters so much to them. Like that, and I see this comment all the time, not even just in MLS. Like I've seen it in with Arsenal players and stuff like that. Like as long as they are not they're not fighting. They're just really passionate about this. And more so than anybody, Walker Zimmerman is like a different animal when he's on the pitch. You watch that man play on the pitch, he looks like there's something going on. Like, of course he's going to be yelling. He's demanding of his backline. That's what we want.
Everyone always brings up Jordan Pickford when it's a big time TV game that he yells at his defense all the time. It's like, well, it's also second in the league in clean sheets. Like, there's a reason for
if
that.
You're an Everton fan, I never bring up Jordan Pickford specifically about that, but you do.
Well, I mean, your team does lose to Everton more than Valera's team, so it makes sense. Because you don't get to see him as much because Everton's scoring on the other end, except for one game, which we're not going to talk about.
Underrated comment, Valer. I appreciate that.
Anyways, so it doesn't matter.
Look, but with that draw in Nashville, I feel like the table is starting to kind of set a little bit more. The East is still kind of crazy when it comes to what teams are doing well, but Nashville is in a spot that's 2 points off a playoff line and then 6 points of avoiding the play-in altogether. They're not far off when it comes to a lot of these other teams that are in play. You are starting to get a little bit more of an understanding, though, about where the East is kind of going to go. We'll talk more about that in the third segment. But I mean, what are you guys thinking when it comes to, like, I don't know, do we even want to go over to where we think Nashville can be? Or do we just want to kind of talk about what the rest of the season looks like?
I think for me, what I'm looking at is that right now, the teams who are fighting for the Supporters' Shield are pretty much defined at this point. And I think the teams who are at the very bottom are also defined at this point. And then there's everybody else in between. And that's what it looks like in the East and the West, whatever. That is how it's going to look like for a while now. The thing is about the East is that obviously these teams are going to be playing each other. So when you look at some of these teams, if they're getting better, that means another team is getting worse because they're all taking points off of each other. And that gives a great opportunity for Nashville SC to go and win. But one thing I will say is that Nashville SC is still in a pretty good position to make the playoffs. I mean, like they are. There's so many more games left. There's a lot of the season left. Over half of the season still left, and all you got to do is win a couple games, man. And they did it. They almost did it this week. They almost won twice. They won once and draw once. So like, it's not that far off. That's all.
I've said the whole time, whether with Gary Smith or not, that this is a playoff roster. It's a playoff team. I think it's fair to expect them to make the playoffs. I think they will. I think the uncertainty around the manager may throw a wrench into it, but it also may prove to be a launching point to be even better. So it's a playoff team. I expect them to be in the playoffs.
Well, and that was actually talked about in the Patreon as well. Timothy, who asked the question, what do we see in terms of possible roster overhaul now that Gary is out, given MLS spending restrictions, designations? What are reasonable expectations if a new manager comes in? And I think Mike talked about it on Saturday, and I think Clay just hit it with a nail on the head. They believe a manager coming in at this point can take them to that spot where you could still be in a playoff position or even win a championship. They didn't make this change because of the fact that they don't believe in the roster. They made this change because the higher ups do believe in the roster. So if you're looking at any sort of changes to the roster specifically being restructured, it's not happening this year or even potentially next year.
Yeah, 100% agree with you, Stephen, there. And thanks, Timothy, for the question. But one thing I will say is that Nashville have two U22 spots available, U22 initiative, that is. And Mike Jacobs mentioned those specifically at his press conference, which to me says that maybe they're thinking about using those. And I would assume that those spots and any other movement in the roster will be in coordination with the new manager. But yeah, agree 100% with Steven. In terms of overhaul, I don't think we're seeing one anytime soon for Nashville.
No, I think that end of the year might be a different story, especially based on the salaries that are being paid. As we now know, it's not like you can buy down any of those DP slots anymore because they're all significantly above where that would be possible. The only sort of major change that I could see happening would be Nashville cutting ties with Randall Leal in the summer. I wouldn't be surprised by that. They did it with Ake Loba last year, so it is something that they could do. I don't necessarily anticipate that happening in the middle of a season, but that's the only sort of major move that I think that Nashville could do.
And we have a lot of other things to talk about as well when it comes to Huntsville, as well as some international call-ups for Nashville that'll affect our time, and then some women's soccer here in Nashville as well. We'll talk about that next right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer. And we're back right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer at Pharma Soccer, of course, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and on our Patreon. We answered a question from our Patreon members in the second segment, and we gave new members just a high five. Thank you for joining. On the first segment, if you want to be one of those guys or want us to answer a question, you should join our Patreon. It's only $5 a month. It helps keep the lights on. We would really appreciate it. We have a decent amount of stuff when it comes to just Huntsville and some international call-up stuff. I do kind of just overall MLS stuff. Can somebody tell me how Caleb Porter still has a job?
No one can.
It's New England Revolution.
Okay, fantastic. All right, I'm glad we got it. I'm glad we got that out of the way. I'm still trying to figure out how Caleb Porter over Gary Smith still has his job, but to each their own. Figured that was my only question. If I was a Patreon member, that would be a question that I would ask you guys, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness with the answer. But look, Huntsville, we had a player come back from injury and score a couple goals right away.
Yeah, another loss for Huntsville, which unfortunately we have seen a lot of this year. But the big news out of that game is Forster Ajago returns from injury. I think he was out for like 6 weeks, and he scores 2 goals. Obviously, he's played for Nashville as well. He played for Nashville in the Champions League match against Mocha. He started and scored twice. And so he's been an effective center forward in the time that he's played so far this season. The only sort of caveat to all this is that he's not currently occupying an international slot on the MLS roster, which means that he cannot play for Nashville. Now, Nashville does have an open international slot. They could make a change to that pretty quickly, or if someone were to obtain a green card, which is also a possible outcome, that would open up a second international slot. But the big the big story is that Ajago, somebody that Nashville's clearly high on, given that they played him in the Champions League match, came back, returned, and scored 2 goals. And they're the type of goals that you want to see a big number 9 scoring. One is running into the box and finishing something right in front of goal, a sliding finish. The other is just, you know, puts in a rebound, like pretty simple stuff that unfortunately we haven't seen Nashville do a lot of basically since CJ Sapong was around, or Daniel Rios even.
So he played the end of February Champions Cup game, and that was his first game of the season. Scored twice. He started 2 games for Huntsville in March and didn't score, but then went out injured. And this was his first game back since that injury, and scores twice again. So I think the talent's clearly there. For Huntsville, unfortunately, they only have 3 points on the season. They're dead last. It's very tough. They're also having an interim manager. So between the interim coach and the interim coach in Nashville, they are one of the youngest, if not the youngest squad in MLS Next Pro. They're using a lot of academy product, and they're using a lot of non-pro players, I guess, if you want to go for that. So you'll see a lot of 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds making their plays and starts for for Huntsville. And then for Ajago himself, I think the main thing for him is to go out there and play for Huntsville as much as possible and score. When you look at somebody like Patrick Ajuman in Charlotte, that's how he earned his money. He got drafted, went to Crown City, and now look at him in Charlotte winning. So I see a similar path, hopefully, for Ajago.
And another like Huntsville roster note, they operate very differently from the way that Nashville operates. Like Valer just mentioned, they sign a lot of young guys, or they have a lot of young guys out of the academy. The other day, they also signed a former Rangers youth player, Tyler Pasnick, signed towards the end of last week. He played with the Rangers FC Academy and in their U18 team. This is the type of signing that they've been making a lot. Younger guys playing outside of the U.S. coming to Huntsville and maybe seeing if there's something there, taking a flyer on guys that would never really have a shot at making an MLS roster. And it's an interesting tactic because the academy is not built up enough to really fully immerse them in like Huntsville and getting them down there. And it's important to remember that if Huntsville doesn't win another game the rest of the season, but Ajago turns into an MLS player, then Huntsville did its job as far as Nashville SC is concerned. Now, if you're a Huntsville fan, that may not necessarily be fun to listen to, but that's the way that these teams work. Their secondary goal is winning. Their primary goal is developing senior players for Nashville SC.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and there was also with the, kind of European season coming to an end, that means international season is kind of coming up. And there's a lot of international stuff going on over the summer, which will affect Nashville SC now after we did just get the U.S. roster for the couple matches coming up in June. Friendlies against Colombia and friendlies against Brazil, where Shaq Moore did get a call up to the squad. So, Valer, what will that do when it comes to affecting Nashville SC this summer?
Yeah, they've played without Shaq Moore this season already. So I think Alex Muyl is probably going to slot in at right back and see what happens. I think the other part of it is that they might be losing Shaq Moore for a little longer if he does end up going to Copa America, which obviously is a huge honor for him. Copa America is a very big tournament, and both North America and South America are involved in it this year. So I think while it's a huge honor for him, I think Nashville definitely misses Shaq Moore. If you see the games they played without him, and Gary Smith back in the day, I guess it's back in the day, but Gary Smith always talked about the importance of him and Walker, so almost on the same line, honestly, for him. He said there are 2 internationals and we need them very badly. So I think for Nashville, it's a bit between Shaq Moore going into that and then Walker Zimmerman possibly going into the Olympics as one of the overage players. So in the Olympics, the whole team has to be under 22 except 3 players. So you get 3 overage players, and one of those based on Greg Berhalter, I think 3. Maybe it's less now.
23 with 3 overage players.
23 with 3. Oh, 23. Sorry, not 22. Yes, I got you. And Greg Berhalter today mentioned that one of those could be Walker Zimmerman. So the good thing is the Olympics and Copa America don't think that they overlap, so maybe Nashville won't lose both of them. Obviously, away from a Nashville perspective, this is a huge honor for both of these athletes if they get to compete in both of these competitions. Now, I don't know if Shaq is going to end up on that final Copa America roster. Nashville, USMNT is missing Serginho Dest, who's effectively a fullback. And I think Shaq Moore is kind of the emergency fullback that they're falling on. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him on that Copa America roster, and I also wouldn't be surprised to see Walker on that Olympics roster.
And ultimately, you want your players making national team. You want them making the national team. That only makes one, when you try and replace them if they move on, it makes it a little easier to say you can come play for Nashville and you'll still play for the national team. In Walker Zimmerman's case, he'll captain the national team in a World Cup match. And that's a pretty big selling point, especially if you're trying to entice maybe an American who's based overseas to come back to MLS. So it's a very good thing to have your players called up long term, but it's very painful for if they're gone a month during, a part of the season when you're trying to get above the playoff line.
Yeah, and
You also
especially
get actual money for your players participating in these tournaments. The club gets payments from FIFA based on the participation in these tournaments. So, it's not for free that they just take these players and go.
Right.
Now, obviously, it's not going to like be life-changing money, but there is financial part of it as well.
Well, I think with, especially with Shaq and Walker as well, I think the implications of the fact that they've both been injured this season for a long amount of time and then going away on an international trip, it's concerning because you don't want to see them injured again, for sure. So, yeah, we'll see how everything goes. But as we mentioned, previously, the game for Nashville against Atlanta started early, so that means Clay had the ability to go watch the Nashville Rhythm first match of the season. Clay, what was it like being back at a Rhythm match?
Oh man, I loved it. I didn't get to go to very many last year because I, was getting married. But it's great. I mean, I've said on here a bunch of times, like, if we're gonna have pro women's soccer in Nashville, which I want, on some level, people need to support semi-pro women's soccer in Nashville, which this year there are plenty of options, more options than ever, actually. So my wife and I and my mother-in-law went out to the Rhythm game, which was a great game, 4-0 win. Girl had a hat trick, all you could ask for. And they'll have a few more home games. I did see a number of people who listened to this show out there. So shout out to CJ and the other folks that showed up, and Dustin Schumann, who was also there. And so, like, if we can get more people showing up to these sorts of games, maybe they'll get a little bit more of a groundswell of support and give opportunities for women playing soccer in Nashville, better opportunities for women playing soccer in Nashville, which is what I would like to see. But that being said, the Rhythm aren't the only team in town. So the Rhythm, like, they won 4-0 against the Atlanta Fire, who were coached by my old coworker, Dom Martelli, which was kind of cool. And they'll next be on the road at Chattanooga FC this weekend. Also playing this past weekend were SC Nashville Wolves, which is an older women's team that had been dormant for a while. They started up. Unfortunately, they lost 4-0 to FC Birmingham. They'll next playing Decatur FC at home, which is at Davidson Academy, I believe, and that won't be for a couple of weeks. And then Tennessee Soccer Club, which we've talked about a few times on here, they actually have both a USL League Two and a USL women's team. They play at Nolensville High School. A lot of these folks, like for Wolves and for the Rhythm, are college players or people who are just out of college or people who are about to go to college. Some of them are very good players that you may end up seeing in NWSL or MLS down the line. And so the TSC men's team, they haven't started their season yet. We're recording Monday. They actually start tonight against Birmingham Legions, probably U23, I guess. And then the TSC women's team are on a heater. They've already played twice. They have outscored Chattanooga Red Wolves and Southern Soccer Academy by a combined score of 8-1. And they will be playing at home against Athens SC on Friday night at Nolensville High School. So the Rhythm and TSC women have each scored 4 goals in their 3 matches they've played so far. So there's some pretty high level women's soccer going on right now in Nashville. And I can't endorse you guys getting out and going to a game, whether it's the Rhythm, whether it's Wolves, whether it's TSC, whatever. Go out and support these folks. They aren't playing for money. And you might see someone who ends up playing in a World Cup or who ends up playing in WSL, hopefully for a future Nashville team down the line.
Get bored by Nashville SC not scoring goals. Go to one of these matches because goals are definitely scored in most matches that I've been
I
to. So it's
always joke. The best thing about going to a Rhythm game is they're going to score goals because they're good. I've seen Rhythm score like 5 and 6 goals so many times over the years, and I've seen Nashville do it like once, twice.
Speaking of scoring goals, though, Nashville is going up against one of the worst defenses in the league and a team that they did score 4 goals against this season again, and that is happening this week, I believe. We have Montreal in Montreal again. Well, on Saturday, is that correct?
It is correct. It is. I Let me run you through these results. There's no better preview than this. 4-1 against Nashville away. 1-1 against Forge FC in the Canadian Championship. 3-2 at home to Miami, loss. 3-1 loss to Columbus at home. 5-1 loss to Toronto at home. Those are the last 5 Montreal Impact games. They have Forge again in the midweek at home this time, and then they have Nashville at home. So maybe they have a chance against Forge to kind of advance, get a win under their belts, and go into Nashville SC in a little bit of better form. But overall, things are bleak for Montreal. That said, they also got rid of, I believe, is their general manager, or well, he kind of left recently, as well as one of their star players asking for a trade, as well as having a brand new first-time MLS coach. They started the season pretty well, but things are clearly gone in the wrong turn. And I would never say a road team with an interim manager is favored, but they're close to it. They're Nashville SC are close to favorites in this match.
The funniest, this is such an MLS thing. So Montreal's won 2 games since early March, and those 2 games are Miami and Cincinnati.
It's a weird team. It's a weird team. I will say the one game they had against Miami, though, Messi was not there.
Right. I'm just saying it's just very funny. Like it's such an MLS thing that the team that just lost 5-1 to Toronto, their last win was against Cincinnati. So
the person I was thinking about is Olivier Renard, who was the chief soccer operations officer, whatever that role it is.
Currently, Montreal has the highest goals against in the East, and second to San Jose in the West over there. So it does have the opportunity for Nashville to score goals. But as we know, it's our predictions that are always correct. And we'll let you know right now if Nashville SC is scoring goals away. So let's start with Clay. Give us plugs and predictions.
I think that we're going to see a similar sort of game as what we saw a few weeks ago against Montreal, where Nashville came out on the front foot. I think you're going to see a team pushing. I think you're definitely going to see that again, like what we saw against Atlanta, where there's a lot of fight to it and a lot of getting forward. And because of that, I'm going to go with a 3-1 Nashville win. They're going to concede a dumb goal with a mistake at the back. And then Hani Mukhtar is going to score twice and assist the other. And also, you can check me out at Clay Lassol on Twitter, at Clay Lassol on Instagram. Check out the Nashville Soccer Archive. If you have stuff you'd like to donate to the Nashville Soccer Archive, we are building it at Vanderbilt University. Please reach out to me on Twitter, and we'll get that all sorted out for you. And I hear like Kicking It 615 is pretty cool, so you should donate to them too.
Yeah, do that at Kicking It 615 on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And then for me personally, at Valer Shabilla on all of those, and YouTube as well. So, well, no, not all of those. I'm not on Facebook. Don't do that. Yeah, go on the YouTube and search Valer Shabilla and then subscribe to that channel. But also follow me on Twitter and Threads and Instagram. And aside from that, I think Nashville SC is gonna go and draw Montreal 2-2, and Sam Surridge is gonna score a brace because he likes to score against Montreal.
Yeah, please make sure you go ahead, Clay.
I was going to say, technically, if it's at Montreal, that would make it duh instead of 2-2, which you can show off. You can show off your French maybe tomorrow, Valer.
I'll give a friend plug as well. Please make sure you're following along with Valer as well on all of his stuff. Valer has a lot of cool things coming out, so please make sure you do follow Valer Shabilla. I'm at PHStevenHD on all of my stuff. I think this game is going to be stupid on Saturday, and it's going to be a 4-3 result for Nashville SC. Sam Surge scores 2. Jack Mayer scores 1. And Hani scores 1. And I think that's going to be how it goes. So thank you again so much for listening to the show. We really appreciate it. We'll be back next week to talk about the match on Saturday, and look forward to talking to all of you and doing this again next week. So appreciate it. Have a good rest of your week.